I'd like to talk about pointing. If you're using the articulatory approach, which means that you're not using a listen-first approach, then it's absolutely necessary to have one way, some way, of showing the students what the sounds are that are in use at the moment. And so we need a chart like this. Now, there are several things that one must remember with a chart like this. First of all, when you're pointing, you have to stand to one side. Very often students come out, the first time they come out to point, they will come and point like this, and of course, nobody else can see what they're pointing. And so they have to be shown that they must stand to one side. Pointing must be precise. Sometimes a student might come out and want to point 10, for example, and point like this. And so I take a pointer and I go, and everyone laughs, and the student knows that he has to actually point properly, like this. So pointing should be precise, it should be quick, but there should be a relationship between the way things are pointed and the way things are said. Once a word or sentence has been pointed, occasionally or sometimes a student might say, "Could you point to it again?" And instead of just doing it, I would say to my class, "Who can point this sentence?" And somebody would come out and do it. They might not get it right, in which case I can hold up another pointer and say, "Who else can help?" And they would come out and collectively get the right answer. This is important because it makes the students much more present to what they're doing. They know that at any particular time they can be asked to do it again. It's very important to show alternative pointings. There are words like library, library, which I point like this. Library. And it's important for people to realize that the word can also be library, library, a two-syllable word. So alternative pointings are extremely important. They allow people to get a sense of what the language will do when it's spoken slowly or quickly. I always ask students to help each other, but helping each other does not mean doing it for the other person. So for example, if somebody is pointing something and they have a problem with one sound, I can ask another student to come out and give and help. But help does not mean point the whole thing. Help means help with that sound. Now help might be, if we've attributed sounds to people, because some people have difficulty with certain sounds, it might be his sound, ah, because he can do it very well. So that's another way of helping. There are all sorts of ways of helping. It doesn't help just to do it for the person. The person needs to be able to do it for themselves. Another important thing with pointing is, it's not useful to always work with volunteers. If I hold up my pointer like this, then I'm asking for a volunteer, and that's fine. But there are moments when I want to know how John is going, or how Fred is going, and so I ask Fred to come out and point. And I do this is because I think that Fred might have a problem, and if he has a problem, I want it to be dealt with now. And we don't want problems just to drift along. And so this gives us a way of making sure that all the students know exactly what the pronunciation of a word is in the circumstances that we're using it in. There's another very important aspect in pointing, which is that when students are looking at somebody pointing, their heads are up, so that if they just turn their heads to the right, to the left, in front, behind, they have people. If they're using a book, well then their heads are in the book, and this is not conducive to saying things to people. And so this is what I like very much about pointing on a chart. It means that the heads are up and people are in a situation where they can just turn their head and talk to somebody, and their heads will be up too. To start pointing, I always make sure that people realize that I'm going to start, and that's easy. I just do like this. And people know immediately that they have to watch. There's another advantage to pointing, which is it makes students very sensitive to sounds. they have to make their choices, and then they have to be able to actually produce these choices. But at least they know what they're aiming at. A person can look at a chart like this and say, all right, I know all of those, there's no problem with those. This one here I can't yet do, this one here I can't yet do it properly either. These are the places where I have a problem. When I do this one, very often it's just not quite right. And so that a person can look at a chart like this and say, I have 50% or 60% or 80% or 90% of English nailed, and I still have to work on certain sounds. Another aspect of pointing is that it enables me to retain a very important aspect of the spoken language, which is it's ephemeral. That's to say, as soon as something is said, if I don't keep it in my mind, then it's lost forever. And I don't actually keep the words in my mind. What I keep is the message. Now, in pointing, the same thing happens. In fact, if I point to this, for example, now, as soon as I lift the pointer away from the chart, the word has disappeared. And if you aren't with it, well, then you don't know what the word was. Now this is very important, because my students are going to have to learn to be very present to everything that happens in the foreign language. They're going to they can't listen automatically. They're going to have to learn to listen precisely and being present to what they're hearing. And we're so used to just listening automatically because we can do this in our own language and then producing language automatically. But you can't learn a language like this. In order to learn a language, you have to be present to what you're doing. And the fact that pointing keeps the language ephemeral means that students become much more aware of the fact of this quality, that language disappears as soon as it's spoken, and here the pointing disappears as soon as it's pointed. When I'm using a chart like this, or any chart of any kind, one of the things that's very useful is to get the students to use their laser finger. A laser finger is a finger like this, and you point to exactly what you're pointing at. And so I can say to the class, follow the pointing with your laser finger. And what I mean is, everyone put their finger out like this, and so the whole class is pointing, and I can see in fact where they're pointing. All the arms should be pointing in one direction, and I can see whether they're all pointing in one direction or not. And this allows me to check that everyone has the right answer. If I see someone who's pointing astray, they're pointing like this or like this, then I know immediately that I have to work with that person. So the laser finger it has two advantages. First of all, it means that the whole class is involved in the pointing, and secondly, it means that I can check if there's anybody whose pointing is a little astray. And you'd be surprised how precise this can be. So these are some of the reasons why I think pointing is extremely useful. Thank you for watching.